Thank you, Bianca, for the nice introduction. Thank you to the organizers for making this possible, and thank you all for coming out tonight. Fighting for animals is a bit like fighting an oil spill. Let me explain why. Think of the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. The Deepwater Horizon disaster led to a blowout with oil spilling out of a borehole, polluting the water, killing aquatic life, and causing lots of harm and suffering. What, to your mind, are the two most important things to do in a situation like this? I think there are basically two things. You can just shout it out. What would you do? Two things you could do. Any ideas? Yeah. Shut the hole, plug the source, yeah? What else would you do? Clean up the oil, exactly. Wow, okay. I hope that was no disagreement. Right, so when we plug the hole, when we plug the source of the spill, we address the cause of the problem. And that's the essential thing to do, of course. And the other thing we need to do is we need to clean up the mess. So that means we address the effect of the disaster. And there are lots of different things you can do to clean up the mess, right? You can, in this case with the oil spill, you can use shovels to clean up the beach. You can hose down the rocks to clean them from the oil spill. You can skim off the oil from the surface of the water. You can clean aquatic life, sea creatures, and try to save them. So, how is fighting for animals like fighting an oil spill? What does it have to do with that? The oil stands for people's harmful attitudes and behaviors towards animals. So people believe in speciesism, in carnism, in anthropocentrism. They believe that it's okay to discriminate against animals. They believe it's okay to eat them, or at least certain animals. And they believe that humans are at the center of it all. They believe it's normal, natural, and necessary to harm, kill, use, and abuse animals. And of course, they act accordingly. Intentionally or unintentionally, directly or indirectly, they support animal suffering, killing, and abuse for various purposes. Purposes such as food, which might be central for all the others. Experiments, tradition, sports, and so-called entertainment. So what to do? We've already seen there are two things we need to do. We need to plug the source, address the cause, and we need to clean up the mess. We need to address the effects. We as animal rights activists are very good at the second part of the job. We're very good at cleaning up the mess. So what we do is we raise awareness by staging demonstrations and protests, for example, by doing outreach to people, by writing books and articles on the subject, by meeting up at conferences on academic or activist levels. And we also, besides addressing attitudes and behaviors, we also try to show and promote alternatives to harmful animal products, such as vegan bake sales, such as cruelty-free clothing, and so on. So there's quite a lot of effort going into the second part of the job of cleaning up the mess. The question is, why don't we also try to plug the source? Why don't we put in the plug? And comparatively little effort goes into that, to my mind. And that's no rare phenomenon. As the 19th century philosopher, abolitionist, and naturalist David Henry Thoreau nicely summed it up, this imbalance. He said, there are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one who's striking at the root. And I think that's exactly the same kind of problem we are experiencing here in the movement. The harmful attitudes and behaviors of adults don't just fall out of the sky. They are the product of early childhood and adolescence and the socialization that takes place during this time. So socialization basically is the root cause of all this we are trying to fight within the animal rights movement. Children are not born speciesists or carnists or anthropocentrists. They are being taught, and they have to learn to become that. By their parents, by their family, by society as a whole. We grow up and teach them, or we grow up being taught and instructed to accept these practices as normal, natural, necessary, and so on. And they partake in these practices, of course. They learn to partake in them, in practices which cause animals to suffer and die. So to address the root cause of the problem, to address the socialization process, what we need to do is we need to address and identify and address the target groups involved in this whole thing. Apparently, children and adolescents are the primary target group, but addressing them alone won't do. We also need to address the parents as a secondary target group, and the educational system as well, because all these two factors are very, very important in the socialization process. So the central claim I'm trying to make today is that more animal rights activism, more vegan advocacy, more research into these two fields needs to be directed at children and at activism directed at children. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying what we're doing at the moment is wrong, quite to the contrary. I just think we need to complement our existing strategies where we address adults and their behaviors and attitudes with a second approach. We need something like a double strategy. We just need to address not only the existing attitudes and behaviors in adults, but we also need to address the formation process of these attitudes and behaviors in children, because these children grow to be adults one day, of course. So this is supposed to symbolize something like a paradox. It's the only thing I came up with on Google. Hope you understand. There's a paradox about outreach to children because it's both easier and more difficult than outreach to adults. Let's start by looking into why it's easier. The central premise I'm building this whole presentation and my whole thoughts on is that children actually like animals. They don't want them to suffer or die. There's something like a natural connection between children and animals. Maybe you can speak of something like an innate sense of compassion. To substantiate that claim, let's look at some of the evidence. A children's program on a German national TV station asked their young audience the following question: what's the world's most important topic? And it was the age group, I think 7 to 11, around this age group. They came up with 3 answers. What do you think was number 3? What's the third most important topic to children at this age? Just shout it out. Any ideas? Family. Well, some wish. No, it's animals, in the sense of species protection, right? They want to protect species from extinction. Number 2, come again? Peace. Also good. No, it's climate change, number 2. And number 1, you wouldn't guess it. It's animals again. Animals as individuals. So animals feature twice in the top 3. That's not supposed to be there, I don't know why. Okay, and there's another pretty obvious fact. When you look at the lives of children, animals take center stage. They're literally everywhere, right? They feature prominently in their stories, in children's books, toys, games. Their entire life is just filled with animals, literally. And there's a whole industry catering for that interest on top of that. The industry uses images of animals to sell products to children, and quite successfully so. There must be some kind of connection, of course. And children want to protect animals. They don't want them just to live horrible lives. Most of you know this clip, that's why I'm not going to show it to you. That's a Portuguese-speaking young boy, and he's eating his octopus, and once he realizes that what he is eating there once was a living creature, he starts arguing with his mother and tells her that's an animal, we're not supposed to eat them, we should rather take care of them instead. And his mother breaks out in tears and accepts this and promises him never again to make him eat octopus or other living creatures. So that also shows that children don't just like them, they also want to protect animals. They've got this natural sense of protecting them. And some even take it one step further. There are lots of young activists. There's, for example, Genesis Butler from the United States. She turned vegetarian at the age of 3 when she learned where her meat came from, and she turns vegan at the age of 6. Today, at the age of 10, she gives TED Talks to packed houses, and she's incredibly successful because people believe her more than they believe adults, because she has this authentic voice. So now let's look into the other part of the paradox, why it's more difficult to reach out to children. And it is partly more difficult. The main problem is that children are dependent and they have a certain lack of autonomy. So children are granted very little autonomy and little decision-making power when it comes to their own life choices. Children just can't decide to do certain things or follow certain beliefs because that is usually blocked by either their parents or their surroundings or the educational system. And that kind of leads to an autonomy paradox, to my mind. So the older the children get, the more autonomy they are granted, and the less likely they are at the same time of being able to exercise it, because they're getting stuck in their own ways more and more the older they get, by habit, gustatory preferences, social pressure, and so on. So the more they are free to do what they want to do, the less able they are to exercise that, in fact, because they're kind of shaped by society and the dominant ideologies and so on. And of course, the two most important factors, we've already seen them, is the family, the parents in particular, and the educational system. Let's look at some of the issues, because parents have lots of concerns, and I think rightly so, because people are highly sensitive when it comes to their own offspring, and that's a totally natural reaction. So we need to take these issues seriously. And that's why it's so challenging to address this thing. Parents think when we present them the vegan or animal rights message that we are doing some kind of indoctrination of the children. And I think, or probably indoctrination, I think most of you are familiar with the term. It means presenting someone with a certain set of beliefs that really don't allow of discussion or debate. You have to accept this, and it's usually a very limited set of information. And of course, the opposite is also true. What we're experiencing at the moment is also a form of indoctrination. Right? So the prevalence of speciesism, carnism, anthropocentrism is also due to a certain form of indoctrination, because we are very selective. We are being presented with very selective information about animals and so on. So we could say advocacy, vegan advocacy, animal rights advocacy kind of remedies this imbalance. And I think also advocacy empowers children to become autonomous and authentic individuals, and that's also something we usually value very highly. Another issue that parents might have, or they might be concerned about, is traumatization. So they might believe that telling children or showing children the unpleasant truth about what's happening with animals will leave them traumatized. And of course we need to be really, really sensitive, because children are sensitive individuals. We can't present them with most horrible images and graphic videos. But I think we don't even need to do that. Given the greater sensitivity they have as young people, maybe we don't even need these graphic images. Maybe we just need to present them with facts about animals, what they can do, their capabilities and sensitivities, and they will come to their own conclusions. I think it also underestimates the capabilities of children to cope with these things. And at the end of the day, they will be exposed to this kind of information sooner or later. So it might make more sense to have kind of a controlled, pedagogically controlled setting to discuss these issues, rather than leave them alone and encounter these things in the courses of their lives, maybe with a higher risk of traumatization. Then there is the issue of family tension. Of course, parents might be concerned that telling children this unpleasant truth about what we're doing with animals will cause some critical questions, some dissent, some behavioral changes that are very unwelcome, especially at the dinner table. So I think there's only one thing you can say in response to that. You can say that raising children to become autonomous and empowered individuals is something we value, rather than just having them as blind followers of traditions and habit. And it can also be enriching for the whole family sometimes, and there's lots of new evidence that suggests this as well. We take our moral clues from those closest to us. So very often it is the case that children can convince their own parents over the course of time, maybe also to adopt or at least consider their own choices and maybe adopt the lifestyle as well. And finally, there's probably the most serious concern, and that's malnutrition. So parents might be concerned that a vegan or plant-based diet is nutritionally insufficient and does not meet all the nutritional needs of children. And that's, of course, a very serious concern. I think at the moment we don't really know much or enough about it. So we definitely need more research on this, and we need to raise more awareness about this, especially because lots of these issues come up in the media again and again, and they're blown out of proportion sometimes. But we should also be careful not to overstate or make claims that are not truthful or that might be wrong, because that could be harmful in the long run. And it would also, of course, harm those individuals, which is totally unacceptable. So I think it would be a good strategy, as long as we don't really know what's going on, to err on the side of caution. Right, so once we take these issues seriously and those concerns, I think we can win parents over as important allies. The other big institution, that's the educational system. So in terms of animals, it's characterized by two things. First of all, there's a lack of information about animal protection usually, and there's also a lack of information about the impact our current food system has on health, the environment, other people, and the animals. So what we need to do, we need to get this information into textbooks and curricula. And there's also another thing about the educational system. It provides some information about animals, but that's usually inadequate. So we don't learn about animals as sentient, intelligent, social individuals with rich inner lives and needs very similar to our own. No, what we learn is about their facts and functions, about their biological facts. They have such and such teeth, or the number of bones in their spine, or they eat this or that, or their ecological or economic functions. So they're supposed to live in the farm or in the forest or whatever. So that also needs to change. We need to bring in more information from modern ethology about what animals actually can do, the rich in the lives they have, and how similar they are in so many crucial respects. And then hope that children, given their greater sensitivity and connection with animals, will come to their own conclusions. Again, we need to get this into the textbooks and curricula. So, and I think once we can do this, once we are successful with that, it can be a very, very powerful thing to do, because the educational system, schools and teachers, they form a very, very powerful system and very influential system that is equipped with authority, and every single being has to go through it. Once this information is there on the agenda, everyone will pass through this and get some of this, and I think that's probably the most important thing we can reach. So what can we do to plug the spill, to stop the oil from leaking, and to continue polluting the water, so the problematic attitudes and behaviors from flowing into society? The answer is what I term early intervention. That's the plug. Early intervention is an umbrella term for all forms of animal activism or vegan outreach that is directed at changing children's attitudes and behaviors towards animals. It covers activities directed at children and adolescents of all age groups, starting from kindergarten to middle school to high school. And of course, different age groups also require different approaches. You can't there's no one size fits all, because of the greater sensitivity and lack of understanding with younger children. You need a different approach. You can't show them the same kind of material. You can't discuss with them the same kinds of issues, apparently. I've identified at least 4 different kinds of approaches. I'm starting with the most difficult one. That's explicit moral appeals. So you talk about animals. You try to teach them about anti-speciesism, about animal rights, animal protection, why they are equals, and so on and so forth. That seems the most obvious thing to do, of course, but it's also very difficult, because most institutions and parents don't care too much about the animals. Then you could try to have an explicit moral approach that is more holistic, where you kind of include the animals into a broader range of topics, like animal rights and the environment. This is a huge advantage because more people care about animal rights plus the environment plus animals than only people who care about only animals. Then there is an implicit approach. You could also work without using or without referring to animal rights in the first place, just you could try to normalize veganism, make it a normal option in canteens, in schools, in cafeterias, and so on. And of course, you could try to implicitly normalize the image of animals, an adequate image of animals. So rather than just in terms of their facts and functions, you could teach children about the rich inner lives, the sensitivities, the vulnerability of animals, and then hope again that their natural connection will go a long way in making them think their own thoughts and coming to their own conclusions. And I've ranked them according to difficulty and prevalence, and I think we can do lots more work here because the most difficult ones are also the most prevalent ones. That's just talking about the animals alone in schools might be not the only possible option we should consider. We should also consider the other options and try to invest in them as well. So let's take a look at the status quo and the challenges. So comparatively little effort goes into early intervention at the moment, to my mind, in activism as well as in research. Not all of these activities or not all approaches are really fully explored, and there is a lack of coordination and cooperation and exchange, which sometimes means that people at one end of the world have a very successful intervention and others try to do the same thing, but they don't even know about this, so they try to start from scratch. So we don't have, and that leads to a lack of cumulative learning. We always try to reinvent the wheel again and again and again. That's totally inefficient and nonsensical. No one would do that. If you want to build a new car, you don't start with a horse carriage. You start with the most current version of the top model and just try to build on that and make it better. That's what we should also be doing rather than have these parallel efforts often isolated. So, as a first step towards addressing these issues, I'd like now to introduce to you the Early Intervention Network. That's a project by ProVeg International. That's a new food awareness organization committed to promoting plant-based living. It's the successor organization of VIBU, the German Vegetarian Association. And we were ranked as one of the 3 most effective and efficient animal charities in Europe. The vision we have is a world where everyone chooses delicious and healthy food that is good for all humans, animals, and the planet. And of course, we know that's a big goal. So we have set ourselves an intermediate goal, a milestone, which is our mission, 50 by 40, which means we want to reduce global animal consumption by 50% by the year 2040. That's not the end goal. That's just a milestone. Right, so the Early Intervention Network is our meta project dedicated to networking, promoting and supporting all forms of early intervention that already exist out there. And the goal of this network is, the long-term goal is to integrate animal protection and also information about the negative impacts of our current food system on other people, the environment, and our health into the educational system, into the books, into the textbooks, and into the syllabi. And the second part of the goal is to create a veg-friendly environment for children to grow up in, so that is kind of a normalization of a vegan or plant-based lifestyle. So this might not lead to children being immediately veganized, but it might lead to, and that's our hope, to something like a greater open-mindedness towards a vegan or plant-based diet. When you grow up in an environment where it's normal to eat vegan options once or twice a week or thrice a week, you might have less resistance and be more open to going the whole way to veganism later on when you realize the whole impact this has. The short-term goal is to support all existing early intervention approaches and efforts directed at this long-term goal. So there might be children's book authors, groups, initiatives that already work in this area. There are lots of them. They're usually smaller groups, but they're very, very active and ingenious when it comes to developing strategies. So we're very much in favor of supporting them and trying to help them do their work better and more efficient. So the target groups we have in mind is a broad range of target groups, in fact, so that it includes individuals, organizations, initiatives, projects, Also researchers who provide us with more information about how to outreach to children, what kind of effect it has, whether it makes sense at all, and so on and so forth. So we want to do both, support existing early intervention approaches and initiatives, but we also want to raise awareness and spark interest in this kind of approach in all those organizations and individuals and initiatives that have so far not included it into their activist portfolio. The overall purpose of this network is to increase the impact and the sustainability of early intervention activities by multiplying successful interventions, right? So one initiative, one group has a very, very successful strategy or textbook or leaflet or whatever it is, and we would like to provide kind of a forum and multiply this to other people in other languages, in other parts of the world. So they don't need to come up with the same idea by themselves. That's what it is, cumulative learning. And we would also like to avoid redundancies. Very often people work parallel and they do the same kind of thing. And they could much better split up the resources and be much more effective and faster when they just knew about each other and when they had some way of cooperating. And that's also something we want to make possible. And last but not least, we also need to identify the needs and deficits. So there are some areas where we already have very good material, teaching materials, and there are other areas where we still lack these things. So in certain areas of animal advocacy, in certain areas of food impact, and also in certain age groups, that's something that also needs to be filled. And once we've got the bigger picture of what is there, we can easily identify where we still need to do some work and maybe find the right people to do that or put them in touch. So to do all this, the concrete things we want to do with this network is collecting and systematizing and also disseminating existing information. So we are creating databases where we collect, for example, textbooks for children that can be used to do outreach to them, maybe categorized by age groups, by topics, and so on. We also want to create forums where people working in these fields can exchange ideas. We want to encourage and support exchange also on a more professional level. We want to start conferences on this topic, both on an academic as well as an activist and advocacy level. We would also love to inspire more research because that is really crucial. There's too little research into the subject, and we definitely need much more information when it comes to nutritional facts, but also to the psychology of children and how best to reach out to them to make sure they can digest the information without being traumatized and do so in a sustainable way. Of course, we also need to do some campaigning. That means coming up with petitions. That would be something like maybe get some of the top ethologists of the world together to sign a petition. Please include the most topical and the recent state-of-the-art information about animals into the textbooks, because your textbooks are totally outdated. And of course, we need to do institutional lobbying and political lobbying in order to get this whole show on the road. So last but not least, why cooperate? There are lots of different stakeholders we want to address with this network, and usually not all of them are always willing to cooperate. I think there are 3 very good reasons to do this in this case. So there's a huge potential. Outreach to children is a preventive approach rather than a curative one. We do something before things go wrong rather than wait for things to go wrong and then interfere. That's what most doctors say you shouldn't do. You should prevent becoming ill rather than try and cure that later on. And it's also very sustainable. Imagine a young person in the age of 12, 15, when they get this kind of message, they have a far bigger lifespan ahead of them to translate these beliefs into actions. And they're not just consumers, they might also be the future decision makers who can shape policies and so on and so forth. The earlier we kind of reach out to them, the better. The second reason why we should cooperate, although we might not be willing to do that in other areas, is it is totally neglected within the movement, to my mind. There are lots of small initiatives, and some of them are really brilliant, and I'm lucky I met lots of really inspiring people across the globe who are already working in this field. I see some of them sitting in here. But compared to other interventions, it's still largely neglected. And given the potential it has, I think we should also direct more energy and resources at figuring out how to do more work in putting in the plug rather than always just focusing on cleaning up the mess. And last but not least, there are special challenges, as we have seen, the circumstances of dependency, lack of autonomy, the resistance we are facing from parents and the educational system, all speak very much in favor of trying to make this a concerted and coordinated effort rather than trying it by themselves or on their own. So let me end by pointing out the obvious fact that when we really want to create effective social change for animals, it takes only one generation to make a huge, huge difference. So let's reach out to future consumers and decision makers now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My question is, how do you make people or organizations to collaborate with your intervention, early intervention? And is it only nationwide, like only in Germany, or Europe-wide? And the intention of my first question was, or is, it's a negative one, I'm sorry, but out of my little experience, I know that so many organizations, vegan organizations in the same country, they even are not able to collaborate out of, I don't know, personal misunderstandings or out of envy and so on. How do you want to make them all work together with this intervention?
Yeah, thank you for this very important question. I don't know. I don't know whether I'm going to make them work all together. That's probably not possible. As you said, people have different kinds of approaches. Some people have different kinds of strategies and different convictions. And there might also be personal issues involved. So sometimes it's just egos. Even activists, even animal rights activists have egos, right? So, and they sometimes stand in the way of doing the most effective thing, and that's a sad thing. And I think I'll try to answer both parts of your question. I've been touring with this presentation for quite a while, to the States, to Britain, and over Europe, and most of the reactions I've gotten so far from established organizations, especially from the big ones, was very positive. And they all signaled we would like to do that. We think it's a brilliant idea, so let's try and work together and exchange ideas. I think the fact that I'm not trying to take away things, I'm not trying to claim I did this or we did this as an organization. We just try to provide a meta intervention where we coordinate the other things and make them more efficient and professionalize them a little bit. That's very attractive to many, especially the smaller players, but also the big ones. So I think it might be possible to get some level of cooperation. I'd love to be able to say we one day will have total cooperation, but I think that's an illusion. There's no doubt about it. We're just human beings, and there's no perfect world with human beings. So we can just strive for this ideal. I think we'll try our very best to do that, but there's no such thing as total cooperation. And I think even if we increase the cooperation by 10, 15, or 20%, that will have tremendous impact, and that's the best we can hope for. Thank you for the question.
So who had the other question again? Okay.
So thanks for the presentation. I'm sure you're aware that, let me call it, the other side has a head start. So under what's called greenwashing, the animal industry has been trying to get into schools, has developed programs that are very effective of getting their material in there. Are you addressing these issues also? Are you countering that in any specific targeted form?
Very good question, thank you. In fact, I had a slide on this in there, but I had to cut it out because I needed to put something else in. Yes, corporate interest is a huge thing. There are lots of ways in which companies and other stakeholders try to influence young people because they know how important that is. I read an article about, I think it was Chrysler, who promote vans, family vans, not to adults, but to children, because they know the voice of the children, the vote of the children will have lots of impact on the decision which family car they're going to buy. So they already know how important it is to address people at this very young age. And I think we need to address this totally. We need to counterbalance this, because they are doing it, we also need to do that. If If we draw out of this, we say, oh, it's too difficult, we can't do that. It's going to be so difficult for us later on. What we are doing, we're waiting, we're standing by, we're watching this whole socialization process going downhill in the wrong direction. And then we start addressing people at the age of 18, 19, telling them, listen, what you've been doing the last couple of years is totally wrong. Let's talk about veganism, let's talk about animal rights. It's so much more difficult compared to we already start to interfere with this process as early as possible. Because that's what the industry does to sell their products, and that's what we should be doing to create a better world. So absolutely, that's one of the top things we need to counteract. Thank you.
Hi, I just have a statement. It's just, I'm so excited to hear about what you're doing. It's exactly along the lines of what I've been thinking for a while, and I have an organization, Voiceless, in Australia, and we've been going for 14 years and haven't focused at all on youth, and we're changing directions now, and from this year it's our key focus. So I'm excited to speak to you later and tell you all our plans and what we're wanting to do. And yeah, it's the most exciting thing I've heard for a while. So I'm glad I came to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very much looking forward to talking to you later.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Is there another question? Right here.
Just a quick one. Is there a certain age that you have as a limit line, or do you even look into going to universities, or is like 18 the cut, or do you have a cut?
I think there are lots of organizations who are already doing work at university level, and they're doing a brilliant job there because they know, or some organizations focus on elite universities because they assume that the future decision makers will come from these places. I think university level has already been covered, or is already being covered. So that wouldn't be the primary thing. Maybe there might be some overlap. You can't just put your finger down and say with 17.5 it's over and then the others take. I think there's a grey zone. But usually I would try to focus and cover those age groups that have so far been neglected. And that's anything before high school / university. And I think as early as possible. I think you can, without using cruel imagery or graphic content, you can reach out to children. You can normalize the image of animals. You can tell them about animals being individuals with rich inner lives and so on, without anthropomorphizing them into cartoonesque figures that speak and fly and drive cars, which is of course bullshit. But I think we can do a lot when we try to rectify this grossly distorted image of animals and simplified image of animals in textbooks without using the word veganism or animal rights in the first place. I think that will make a huge difference. I've talked to some ethologists and they totally agree that we need to change the way animals are depicted and described in textbooks, because children grow up with learning about animals as objects, as means to satisfy our ends. They learn about the number of bones and learn about what they eat, where they live, and so on, which is probably right in some instances, and sometimes it's not, but it's not sufficient. It doesn't even scratch at the surface of what animal life is about. And I think once we reveal this to younger people, they will ask questions like, hang on, they are so intelligent, they are so sensitive, they have friendships, and we just eat them? Seriously? I think that's my hope. Right. Thank you.
Thank you once again for an amazing presentation. I'd like to ask for how long has this program been going on, and what successes have you had so far in Northern European countries such as Norway, Finland, and Sweden?
We're only just in the process of building it. So this was more or less has been created in the last couple of months. And we're still in the process of rolling it out and coming up with ideas. That's why I'm doing a kind of a speaking tour to find allies around the world. And I'd also love to learn more about Scandinavian countries, because that's one of the areas that's still missing. So if you've got any ideas and suggestions, I'd love to meet with you later on and you just tell me all about it. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Is there another question? Oh.
I have again a question about what you said at the beginning about feeding children or nourishing children in vegan style or plant-based style, that we should be more careful about it because it's not proved yet scientifically. Is that correct, what I understood?
Yes.
Yes. I thought it is possible because everybody says, all the organizations say, it's a matter of how you put the food together, like if you for old people, for pregnant women, so it should be all possible. But can you adjust something that I understand it?
Yeah, I think in most cases that is true, but there's still some scientific controversy about this. You can find studies that prove that, and you can find studies that prove that wrong. And I think maybe the nutritional reality is very complex for some people. So there might be people with special nutritional needs, for example. And I think on average, or the normal people, or the standard people, all of this is bad, I know I don't get the right word for now. Bear with me. You know what I mean. It's well, the average, well, maybe the average people, is that? Yeah. That it might be no problem if it's well planned, right? Still, again, there are people who have deficiencies, nutritional deficiencies, not only because they're vegan, there might also be other reasons. I think 20% of people in Germany have a B12 deficiency, and not 20% are vegan. So there might be some phylogenetic or genetic thing that makes it more difficult for people to have a really balanced diet meeting their needs. So I think we should be careful not to say, yeah, if it's well planned, don't worry, just feed your child a thing. If it goes wrong, the impact is horrible, not only for the people involved directly, but also how it gets blown out of proportion by the press, by the media. And it's considered some kind of abuse by some media already. So we need to be really, really careful. And I think in this case, we need to be honest. We also need to make sure that we're not being blinded by our own expectations and biases. We would love to have this as a truth, but we need to be careful whether it's really true, because we can also blind ourselves into believing that or wanting to believe that. So that's the only thing where I say we'd rather err on the side of caution. If we're not 100% sure, let's wait until we're 100% sure and we really have the scientific evidence, or some kind of test. Maybe some scientists can come up with a test to say, yeah, for you it's no problem to feed your child a purely plant-based diet to a certain age. That it's just because this issue is so sensitive. Adults can do what they want to themselves. Right? You can eat anything. You can just eat crap, and it's your thing, right? But you shouldn't do that with children because you've got responsibility. That's why I'm really, really concerned about taking this issue seriously. And I think we'd rather err more on the side of caution than saying, yeah, don't worry, it will go all right. Don't worry about it too much, because that might backfire badly. But that's just my personal position. I'm not an expert, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm a trained philosopher, I have no idea about these things, so I'd like to either hear the experts speak to that.
Okay, so another question coming from the other side.
Hi Janice, my name is George. I'm a vegan dietitian. So you are correct to say that we got to be careful because some people might not just have access to food, or maybe they just do not care to plan the diet. But for that, it is the caution is to say that the diet needs to be well planned, and not that we don't know if it's possible. We know it's possible, but if we're going to give some advice, it's not saying that we're not sure yet. It's just saying that you got to be careful about these and these nutrients, or get a book, get online, get a dietitian to tell you. Because when you say that you're not sure, it sounds like an experiment, and it is not at the moment we are now. But it is correct to say that we need to be more careful. And I think it's enough to say that, because you already gave a warning, right? You already highlighting that for some people it will be necessary to get some more nutrition information, or reorganize the way they eat so that it will be safe for their children. But it is possible. It's just a matter of how they organize it. Right?
Okay, thank you, George. Yeah.
I think we have time for like 1 or 2 more questions, if there are any. Okay.
Thank you for the very interesting presentation. My question is really related again to the discussion about the diet, but also, the psychological effect on, the kids in school. Of course, I understand that if it's a, balanced vegan diet, then everybody's safe, and then the kids can have actually a very healthy healthy life. But one of the things that is kind of interesting is that all the times, maybe if the majority of the other kids are actually eating something else, then there might be a kind of a negative effect on kind of alienating the kid that is eating something different. And probably, I don't know, but maybe I'm just guessing here, what you experience as well in reaching out different type of school is that at the moment, even from a kind of a religion and creationism perspective, there are some schools that still don't want kids to learn about, Darwinism. So there might be some differences again from school to school, and this makes, the challenge even more difficult, I guess.
Absolutely. There will always be schools or institutions or parents who are totally unwilling to take in any truth or any new facts. Right? That will always be the case. I don't think there's any approach that is going to circumvent this problem. All we can do is provide reliable, scientifically based information, a non-dogmatic approach, and pointing out the fact that what we are advocating is a better world that is beneficial for the people themselves, for the health, for the environment, for the long run, for future generations, and for the animals. And we might not reach all people with that. There's no such thing as the secret formula to convince people. I think some people will never be reached. But the better job we do, the more likely we are to reach as many people as possible. I'm not a pedagogue, so I don't really know exactly how to do that. Right? There are specialists who can do that. It's more my job to see the big picture and try to identify how we put these people in the right positions to be as effective as possible and have the biggest impact for animals, for the environment, and for the planet and the people in general. So I'm not too worried about this, and I think we can rely on the fact that young children might be receptive to certain messages, especially when it comes to animals, regardless of the metaphysical, religious, or whatever, or ideological system they grow up in. Of course, there are limits to that, but I think we should still try the best we can. At the end of the day, it's probably just making it a little bit more likely to reach out to them during their later lives. And if not, okay. But I don't really know exactly how to do this, but let's wait and see and roll out this kind of approach first and then see how the institutions react. But I'm expecting resistance. There's no doubt about this. The question is how to smartly approach the whole thing in order to make this resistance as low as possible and show people that it's in their own interest. And usually when they understand, we're not taking away something from them, we're doing something for them, which is a fact. We don't sell things. We don't want to grow rich on this. We just want to make a better world. Once they understand, they also benefit from this. My hope is very high that they usually accept lots of these things, but not all of them will.
Okay, so now we're out of time, and thank you so much, Jens, for your great talk.
Thank you.